Now that it's been about 2 weeks since the NBA Finals, and we've hopefully made it through that weird agenda pushing and list recompositioning period that happens after every finals, I've had time to sit in my emotions and thoughts about the series. And I've gotta be honest, I've never felt more robbed, misled, saddened, and overall disappointed from an NBA Finals than I've felt this year. Coming off of last year's absolute snooze fest, I was really hyped up for this year's playoffs because it seemed like we were on track for a legendary series. While the East may not have been ultra competitive, and it was clear from the start that the Celtics were coming out, the West was filled with drama and coming out parties for superstars. We got an amazing OKC Dallas series and a dominant showing from Ant-Man and the T-Wolves en route to sweeping Kevin Durant and the Suns. And if that wasn't enough, it was followed up with a banger of a series between the T-Wolves and Denver, where we saw the reigning champs and many people's favorites to repeat fall to Minnesota in 7. And by the end of it all, the final two teams standing were Dallas and Boston, and we were primed for a legendary series. This was supposed to be peak cinema, legendary hoops, the type of series that we talk about for years to come. And instead, what we ended up with was an uncompetitive, boring, and highly unentertaining 5-game series that we really could have done without. But in watching this series and witnessing the internet's response to it, it made me think about what ingredients are needed to make a great finals and why this series turned out to be so underwhelming. I watched as people made comparison after comparison between this year's finals and legendary series like 2016 or 2010. And I think that's a great way to go about this, because these comparisons can help illustrate a larger point about the NBA, social media, and the passing of the baton that we're witnessing. So here's what I found to be the 4 key ingredients needed to make a great NBA Finals. The first and most obvious ingredient needed is star power. We all understand that the NBA is built on the backs of stars and star power, and there's no better stage to showcase and create superstars than in the NBA Finals. Everybody wants to tune in to not only watch the best of the best go at it in a dogfight of 7 games, but also to see who's able to make a name for themselves and emerge as a new superstar. The 2 most obvious cases for this are a guy like Jimmy Butler or, and this is going to be controversial, Kawhi Leonard. These are both players who have made entire careers and built legacies off of their finals performances and legendary postseasons, and become iconic for their ability to raise their game to a new level when it's winning time. The emergence of new stars, as well as the battle of old established stars, are all a key aspect of any classic finals, and in the case of 2016 and 2010, we had 2 of the most iconic instances of these battles. In 2010, we got to see the legendary Kobe Bryant match up with the Boston Celtics Big 3, and see 4 of the biggest stars in the sport go head to head in a grinded out series chock full of talent and elite shot making. And in 2016, we were able to witness a LeBron at the peak of his powers, along with his new group of co-stars, go up against the juggernaut Warriors, who were led by a guy who many were hailing as the new face of the league in Steph Curry. All eyes were on this matchup and seeing whose star would prevail and take the baton to become the new face of the league. And you know what? This year's series actually passes this star power test, and that's part of why it's so disappointing. Even though I've made it clear that there's been a lot of unwarranted Tatum hate and a general diminishing of his star in the eyes of the public, the fact is that he is and continues to be a superstar. And when you put him up against the international megastar that is Luka Doncic, I think you have enough star power to have a great series. In fact, there was something of a parallel between the Tatum and Luka story, because even though they aren't the only 2 players that were in contention for becoming the face of the league, this year's series certainly did have some bearing on the face of the league debate, similar to 2016. And when you mix this in with the super hyped Boston fan base, who honestly did a really good job of hyping up their arena and allowing that electricity to be palpable in the series, I don't think you can really make a compelling argument that star power was lacking this year. However, while I do feel that the series had enough star power, the second ingredient needed to make a great finals, and the first that I feel this year's finals was truly missing, is storyline, or as it's more colloquially known, beef. When I mentioned the 2010 and 2016 finals, a big part of the intrigue behind seeing these stars play was the fact that there was a prior history and real smoke between these 2 franchises and their stars. For Kobe and the Lakers, he had lost to them 2 years prior in 2008, so everyone was not only eager to watch him get his revenge with a reloaded Lakers squad, but also to witness another entry in the league's most storied rivalry between the Lakers and Celtics. And in the case of 2016, it was clear that a rivalry was brewing between the Warriors and Cavs, and the controversial way that the shorthanded Cavs went down to the emerging dynasty that was Golden State made it so that there was a lot to work with in the way of crafting stories. Both of these finals were seen as rubber matches between the top two teams of the sport, and the media was able to not only draw out this narrative, but track it for months and months on end to build anticipation. They used whispers of secret disdain between LeBron and Steph, or leaned into the Mamba mentality and the obsessive nature of Kobe Bryant to cultivate anticipation within the public and make them eager to watch these two fight it out. And in this way, predictability and the media are both extremely necessary to help craft a legendary finals. Even though we said it was boring at the time, knowing that LeBron and the Warriors were on a crash course set for one another made it so that we all knew how this would end, and that somebody had to lose and there was only going to be one winner. It was like watching a Rocky movie, where the two champs are eyeing each other down the whole film, and everyone knows that this ends with these two duking it out in the ring. In the case of this year's finals, we find that the unpredictability of the NBA and the increased talent pool acts as a double-edged sword. Because while we do get to watch in real time as teams fight it out to determine who would be in the finals, the media isn't given an entire year to draw out narratives of beef or static between players and teams that will be resolved at the end of the season. And it's not like they didn't try. The Kyrie going back to Boston narrative was kind of compelling, but ultimately every beef and rivalry they tried to manufacture fell flat. You had people trying to sell a Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic rivalry narrative, and nobody cared about it. Because why would anybody care about a Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis beef? It wasn't really marketable, and that lack of anticipation partially came from the media going all in on the Ant-Man narrative. And when he failed to make the finals, the general absence of any real interesting story between these teams was forced to take center stage. And as if the lack of an interesting story or any sense of real disdain and competitive fire from both of these teams wasn't palpable off the court, on the court, it wasn't present at all either. And this is the third aspect of a legendary finals: on-court drama. This is where I start to get a bit angry with this series, because it's one thing for a team to not have any real smoke with their opposition off the court. And even though it's a common thing for people to say that the league is too friendly lately, ultimately, I don't take too much issue with it, because at a certain point, you become too rich to have any real beef with a person. But this year's finals was some of the most uncompetitive, uninspired, whiny basketball that I've ever seen on such a large stage. And I'd be lying if I said that it didn't cause me to cringe and perhaps reevaluate the esteem in which I hold certain players in my mind. I'm of course talking about Luka Doncic, who in this series spent just about the entirety of the 5 games either getting absolutely baked in isolation, fouling, or crying to a ref about fouling, and it was really nasty to watch. Because like I said earlier, guys like Jimmy Butler and Kawhi Leonard have built entire legacies off of what they do in the finals and how they rise when winning time arrives. And I expected Luka to do the same because we've seen him do it time and time again. But instead, despite his averages of 29, 8, and 5, it felt like he never truly got started and locked in on winning. And when he fouled out in Game 3 after trying to take a silly charge with 5 fouls, it really caused me to question how prepared he was for the moment as a competitor. Watching Luka, and I hate that I'm going to say this because it's such a Skip Bayless talking point, but it seemed like he lacked that psychotic winner's focus and obsession that we had seen from him in years past against the Clippers and Suns. And it didn't help that Kyrie struggled massively, along with Jason Tatum being lambasted by the media and public for underperforming in a series where the average score differential was 17.6 points. So all of the aura that was lost in the inability to craft a compelling narrative was only further lost when the on-court product was equally as unimpressive. This series was a far cry away from the grinded out nail-biting basketball that we were blessed with in 2016, where we saw ejections, legendary offensive and defensive performances, and post-game interviews that only further enhanced the on-court product between the players. But while I've outlined 3 of the basketball aspects of what made this finals feel so awful, there's a 4th, more social aspect of the conversation that I think has been neglected in most basketball discourse. And since this is where I anticipate my retention graph sliding straight down into hell, I'd just like to ask you to like the video on your way out. The 4th missing aspect of the finals, and one of, if not the most key ingredient to building a legendary finals, is nostalgia. In the social media age, there's an overwhelming feeling of dread with growing older and maturing. and we look back on our youth with fondness and inflated grandeur. And we see it with all forms of media, from the nostalgia for childhood cartoons to the inflated perception of early 2000s and 2010s music and the aesthetic. People will always believe that the current product or trend pales in comparison to what we grew up with. While these finals may have felt auraless for us, that brain-rotted 11-year-old nephew or younger sibling that you have will likely look back on this and remember it as peak. We remember moments in the context of where we were in our lives. I remember the 2016 finals through the rose-tinted glasses of the XXL freshman class, responsibility-free youth, and the overall vibe of that year. It's all just inflated in your memory. So you look back upon it far more fondly than you could ever think to look at this year's series. In that way, even though the on-court product for this year's finals may have been subpar, even if it was peak hoops, it still wouldn't compare to whatever you think of when you imagine a good finals, because that association with vibes and positive times can't be matched. It's very rare that you're able to appreciate the good moments in your life while you're in them, and we were blessed with what we had in 2016 and 2010. So even though this year's product was a little mid, and it certainly wasn't the finals that we thought it would be, and it wasn't the finals we even deserved, maybe a bigger part of the reason it felt different is because things are different. But when we look back at these finals, especially in the context of the future, and seeing how this may have been a coming out party for certain superstars, or the inspiration that was needed to push others to a certain level, it may ultimately become far more important in our minds. This very well could be the first definitive year that we welcome in the new generation. And hopefully, as the history of the league and these superstars unfold, this year's series ages gracefully and becomes the first in a new era of the league. So those are my 4 ingredients for a great finals, and that's gonna do it for this video. Hopefully if you stayed this long, you liked the video, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.